interrupt the monotony of my voice. Would you please have an example of a decision, very specific decision around the protected areas that requires several levels, several instruments, and several powers? I know it's an horribly complicated question, and it is to really wake you up. Please, Suter.
In the flying fishing season, the migratory fishing season, we call it rayon. Then there is flying fish. Then there is this conflict between the tribal people and the outside fisher, bigger fisher board from south cross border Taiwan. And so there are several levels. The first is the Fishery Bureau, who have the fishery rights, and we have no fishery rights. The fisher have the outside fisher, they have fishery right, and also the county government, because we say that this should be our traditional marine territory. Why active at least in our rainy season? You should protect us. So yeah, we have such kind of negotiation and conflict.
So there are several actors,
yes,
and different levels of decisions.
Yes.
And what about the instruments? Is a law that says that everybody can come and fish,
yes.
or
So
it's
about you, because I'm not familiar what is instrument. Yeah, you are the rule game. We have a tribal customary rule, and they have the maybe a Fishery Act.
yes.
And
So two instruments: the Fishery Act and the customary law.
Yes.
So they are already that, and maybe different powers. What sort of powers are we dealing with?
Yes. 3 level and 3 part.
Yeah, and
It's the tribal people. We protest, we demonstrate about it, and we go to the county government, and then they intervene, and also we talk with the fishery bureau, and to negotiate also with the local outside southern Taiwan fishery board.
yeah. And what very important about your example? What is the outcome? What is the decision that is finally taken? Can they fish or cannot fish?
The final decision is after our struggle, very little. The final compromise solution is we have given 3 nautical miles of a marine territory,
Yeah.
and they promise they will not come near or into this 3 mile.
Right.
Of course, they can in the 3.5.
So this is already a fabulous example of a compromise solutions among different powers through different instruments and levels that arrives at an endpoint that doesn't satisfy 100% anyone, but it actually ends up giving something to everybody.
Yes, in the future, we think we should ask 6 nautical miles, and the fishery right. Now we have no fishery right. We are not recognized as fisher, because our traditional is not fishable.
Okay, so you want to upgrade your rights, your instruments to really have a place at the table of decision making, and you are adding the dimension of change. The decision, the management decisions, has to be taken by actors that want to be strengthened by rights.
More important is it should be not a local government regulation, administrative regulation. It should be legalized, recognized that this, because this is our traditional territory, and this is our customary rule, and we tax only in the 4 months of the running season, the planetary fishing season, you should not come in.
That's fantastic, because you want to strengthen your instrument of decision making. I know that there are other people who would like to make other examples, but please hold on, because there is time, and I know that Barbara has left the room, but if I go beyond the time, she's going to kill me. So now we are sort of ready to move into a more complex understanding of what protected area governance is. And this is a definition that was given in the eve of the World Parks Congress by the Institute of Governance of Canada, that is so rich and full of life and stuff inside that is nearly impossible even to retain. But let me try to read it for you. Protected area governance is the interactions among structures, processes, and traditions that determine how power and responsibilities are exercised, how decisions are taken, and how citizens or other stakeholders have their say for the given protected areas. As you can see, that complexity is really made round in that decisions, but still you have plenty of questions in your mind when you look at it. I mean, which regulatory and governance instruments do apply, really? How does interaction actually take place? Who has the legal or customary jurisdictions to enforce laws, policies, and rules? I mean, even in one specific country and situation, often you find ministries who fight with one another, saying, oh, no, we have, I mean, I work a lot in Senegal. And in Senegal, yes, there are some very nice colleagues there. For marine protected areas, you have two ministries who are playing the ball with one another and saying, oh, this is a matter of the Ministry of Environment. No, it's a matter now of the Ministry of Fisheries. You know, even at the level of basic structures of governance, sometimes you have these complex understandings to come about. So, and even more so when we have that interplay between traditional and modern rules and decision-making powers. So what prevails when those clash? Further is the time dimension. Protected area governance is a process of developing and exercising authority and responsibility over time. And let me give you a sort of a working definition of effective governance. It's a sort of working balance among these multiple instruments and powers, and I add positively exercised in a positive, forward-looking way, while remaining flexible and adaptable and capable of responding to the changing needs of in situ conservation. Meaning that governance is really not a fixed state of affairs. It is a complex phenomenon that changes through time, and it has embedded in itself this sense of response, responding to changes that are happening in the particular biogeographic situation, but also in the embedding social and political larger context. So it's not something that you can snap into a two-word definition, but I hope and I'm pretty sure that everybody here has a sense of that richness and complexity. Now, however, if we dwell for too long with something that is so rich and complex, we hardly can do something about it. So there was another tendency that started in Durban, which was a tendency to make things simple, practical, and easy to deal with and to comprehend. So two other properties were defined for governance at Durban. One is quality and one is type. These two have been accompanying us since Durban, and they are going to also accompany us today a little bit, because there are two dimensions of making sense out of a particular situation of governing protected areas that hopefully you will find bring us to some results. Quality is defined and understood with reference to some principle that the UN has been developing through time as good governance. Now, these are going to be discussed by Barbara in the afternoon, and I'm going to just quickly mention them. They can be subsumed under 5 main areas that are in themselves quite rich inside. But let's say one is the basic principles of legitimacy and voice, which includes many others, such as the consensus orientation and subsidiarity, which means taking decision at the lowest possible level compatibly with capacities. Then there is the principles of knowing where we are going, direction, having a sense of direction, having clear what we want to achieve with these protected areas, having it really clear and spelled. Then performance, actually, are we or not achieving it, which is very much embedded with the management effectiveness. Then accountability and transparency that goes with that, and fairness. Now, as just mentioned, Barbara is back, and she's going to be dealing with that in the afternoon much more in depth. But this morning we're going to deal more in depth with type. And the type was defined at the time of the Durban Paris Congress as an initially rough set of answers to these questions. Because actually it was very interesting what happened before Durban. Instead of looking just at protected areas, when we were preparing for the governance stream, which had many, many events in Durban around these questions of governance, we had preparatory studies for a couple of years. And the question we asked ourselves was not, who is governing this and that. We asked, who is actually having authority, responsibility, and accountability for areas that seem to thrive for biodiversity and livelihoods? Please appreciate the difference. We are not just looking at protected areas that exist, we are looking at where the authority and responsibility lie for conserved areas, for something that achieves conservation. And we had 4 different answers. Broadly looking at the globe, we had the major immediate answer that was, yeah, the government. The government in very many places, through agencies at various levels, holds authority and responsibilities for areas that are well conserved. They are the protected areas of the world that we know of, the national parks, the reserves, the wilderness areas, and so on. Then we had the answers that said, well, actually the government, but there are other parties that in several situations hold authority and responsibilities with the government. So another type, another kind of answers to that question was various parties together. Then another answer was that the owners of the land can very well decide to conserve it, not to really use it in unsustainable or disfiguring ways. So individual landowners or corporate actors can own areas that are well conserved. And finally, and most delightfully for many of us, we found that the concerned indigenous peoples and local communities around the world really do have de facto authority and responsibilities for many areas that are very well conserved. So, these four broad answers that were found, and pretty much all over the world, in every region of the world, started defining four main sets of what became called governance types. And notice that we are not talking about governance types de jure. De jure meaning that they are really inscribed in the legal system in a particular country. We are talking about de facto. Who is actually having de facto authority, even if it contradicts de jure. And this is the case very often for indigenous peoples. De facto because they are there. De facto because they are the prime relator with the resources. Well, what Durban told us, the results of this very rich set of encounters, dialogues, thinking that went around Durban, told us is that all these types are legitimate, meaning the society accepts and embraces them, and they are important for conservation. This is the IUCN matrix. I'm sure you have seen it before. This is one dimension, is the dimension of the very well-known management categories of protected areas. You have the 6 categories here. And of course, as you know, they are distinguished about the main management objective for protected areas. What you want to do, well, if you want to conserve wilderness, you go into category 1, and then ecosystem into category 2, natural features, and then you have species or habitats, you have landscape or seascapes, and manage resources, natural resources to use sustainably. Now, after Durban, we started having another dimension in this possible matrix, which is the dimension of governance according to the 4 main types that I just mentioned. So here you have a first column that is the one that embeds the governance by government. Then you have this. Then you have a column for the shared governance, several actors together. A column for private governance, where you have landowners mostly that decide to conserve, and indigenous peoples and community governance. Let's go a little bit more in depth into the 4 columns. Governance by government, it can be at different levels. At the level of park agency, ministry, parastatal. The land is also often owned by government. In very many countries, the first thing the government tries to do is to buy the land in order to have the strongest possible hold on what to do about it. But increasingly throughout the world, you see that more and more local and sub-national governing structures and ministries are involved in protected areas establishment and decision making. And sometimes you also have governments who decide to delegate. They delegate the management, the daily management, to a particular NGO, for instance, but they retain the decision making power, they retain the key decision over what is the destination of that particular area, what is the main objective, where the money goes. 3 main subtypes that were considered, but this is really arbitrary. You can imagine yourself many other things. But let's say at the protected areas established and governed by federal or national ministry or agency, protected areas established and governed by local municipal ministry or agency, And the last one that I was just mentioning, the delegated management situation. Now, would you care to tell me if one of you has good experience on a particular protected area that is governed by the national government at one of these possible levels? Yes.
So in Germany, we don't have a national system, but a regional. So in Germany, we have not a national system, but a regional system. So the regions are in charge for establishing protected areas and managing protected areas. So probably this would come in the second column of your areas. And in some areas, even they have a system to delegate the management to an NGO or some kind of corporate institution. This also exists.
Now, can you identify in Germany a particular body or person who has authority and responsibility for key decisions about the protected areas? Like if you say at the regional level, is that the protected area